Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation, Managing Business Risks of Large-Scale Cloud Migrations, brought to you by WANdisco. I would like to introduce you to your presenters. First, Gopal. Gopal heads the Data and Analytics practice in North America, focused on CPG, retail, logistics, and manufacturing clients. And now let me introduce you to our second presenter, Paul. Paul has overall responsibility for WANdisco's product strategy, including the delivery of product to market and its success. This includes directing the product management team, product strategy, requirements definitions, feature management and prioritization, roadmaps, coordination of product releases with customer and partner requirements, and testing. And then your last presenter for the day is Mata, and Mata leads technology consulting and cloud for a data and analytics practice. And now I would like to pass it off to the three of you.
Thank you. Paul, if you could flip to the agenda slide. Thank you. So thank you so much, Drew, and thanks for this opportunity. Thank you everyone for making time to hear our approach to large-scale data migrations to cloud. What we've put together today for the next 60 minutes is broadly three topics. I'm going to introduce some of the key drivers of what our clients are looking for when they migrate to cloud. What are some of the drivers and what are some of the objectives for migrating to cloud? I will then hand over to Paul to take us through our proposition and how we are solving this with the LiveData approach that we're going to be talking about. And then we will hear a very successful migration that we've accomplished earlier this year. Mara is going to talk us through some of the business challenges and the technical details of how we went through accomplishing this. So I'm hoping this is going to be informative and useful as well. You can reserve your questions towards the end, and we'll have a Q&A session so that if there are any questions during the presentation, you could raise them towards the end. Paul, if you could. Thank you. So why is cloud migration important, right? So the way we at Infosys see this, we see this as three distinct horizons in which our customers are investing in building capabilities as well as taking up large-scale transformations. So essentially, it all boils down to bringing all data together. As we move from an app-centric world to a more data-centric world, the biggest challenge is on how do you efficiently bring all of this data together, and how do you bring all of this together on cloud platforms, which is where all of the investments and technology enhancements are happening. So if you look at it, the first challenge that most of our clients are trying to solve is to seamlessly bring all of this data together, which is what we call as the modernize phase. What we've done here is pictured the transformations that some of our clients go through in three phases, and this is a blueprint of what we would like to call as helping our clients navigating to what they believe is their next capability horizon. While they move from the modernize phase to the monetize phase is really where they are starting to reimagine processes. Data becomes central to driving some of these strategies. You've heard of a lot of initiatives related to customer intimacy, a lot of initiatives. Again, we are all in a COVID world today. You've seen data being never so important than what it is today in helping them stay informed about what is happening in their supply chains and how do they remove risks across all of their operations. To a lot of our customers actually starting to monetize data. So a lot of retailers that I work with are expressing a desire to look at opportunities to monetize data. There's so much of insight that's collected at point of sale terminals that each of these retailers have, and how do I make this information available more seamlessly and collaborate with my supply chain and value chain partners. which essentially takes us to the next phase of network, where we are seeing increasingly broader collaboration happening with respect to capabilities being shared and how data becomes integral to all of this coming to life. If you move to the next slide, Paul. So, like I said, central to all of this is our ability to seamlessly migrate as well as bring data together. Again, we've seen the way we picture this, as long as your data volumes remain small, business is probably still okay with a small amount of downtime. But when we see data volumes grow, more business critical applications that are getting developed, the dependency on data platforms becomes very critical. So the least they would want is, again, during these times when we're looking at data being critical to driving strategy, the least they would want is your platform going down for a few days or even for a few minutes or hours when we are doing this migration. So here's where we came together. WANdisco has got this brilliant proposition of keeping data in sync when we do this migration from on-prem Hadoop data platforms to cloud. And they could do this while data is changing. Again, we're going to hear a little more about what this technology proposition is when Paul presents the section, but then this is really what caught our attention. We believe we've got a great proposition of bringing our services capabilities together, which we've always been well recognized for across a lot of our clients that we work globally with. We believe there is a great proposition in bringing our services proposition together with the capability that WANdisco offers to enable clients to seamlessly migrate from on-prem cloud Hadoop data platforms to new cloud capabilities. Getting to this point is really the beginning of what we would believe is a lot of transformation that could happen post this. So to hear more about what our proposition is and how did we do this successfully for a client of ours is what I would request Paul and Madad take us through. Over to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gopal. So this is Paul Scott Murphy from WANdisco. I've had the good pleasure of working very closely with Infosys over quite some time now. The partnership between WANdisco and Infosys has been initiated very directly in response to requirements that we've seen from large organizations wanting to conduct cloud migrations. WANdisco's role in that partnership is primarily as the technology provider for a solution that we call our LiveData platform. To introduce that to you, I want to talk a little bit about the context for why this approach is important, particularly for large-scale migrations. And really that's the topic of the webinar today, is the business approach to large-scale data migration to the cloud. WANdisco terms this context the data migration gap, and I'll explain why we've identified a particular technical gap that exists between traditional tools that support copying data from one location to another, perhaps through an ETL type pipeline or a streaming solution, and the actual requirements that emerge for organizations wanting to migrate to the cloud or across cloud environments for their, typically for their data lakes, right? Their very largest data environments. So the term we've provided here around kind of describing this data migration gap is really to say, well, how do you migrate data at petabyte scale for what are becoming increasingly business critical customer data repositories? And it's that business critical aspect which is emerging as the real driver behind the demands for technologies that support migration requirements. As organizations are growing the sorts of platforms that are built out across large-scale data repositories, data lake architectures, analytic platforms, and other business-critical tools, they're increasingly becoming more and more central to the way those organizations operate. We've all heard the term that data is the new oil. I wouldn't kind of ascribe to it that way, but it's certainly the case that data is increasingly important for business-critical operations. across organizations, and that trend is only increasing. Right? It's one of the key drivers for the adoption of cloud infrastructure itself, the ability to scale effectively as your data volumes grow, as the rate of change increases. The other side to the data migration gap, though, is also that organizations are increasingly global, right? Operating in environments where there may not be direct control over the physical location where their data are created or ingested or processed. And organizations may need to move to an environment where they can take advantage of the type of infrastructure the cloud provides to more flexibly accommodate the need to create and process and analyze data regardless of where it's created. Now, it's not just WANdisco talking to these requirements. We conducted an independent study, or initiated an independent study, that was done through a survey asking organizations questions about the key risks that they see in performing migrations for large-scale data environments. The results of that survey were very clear in identifying the key challenges that organizations saw as impeding them from completing migration successfully. And this slide really talks to that. By far, the largest indicator of risk for organizations wanting to conduct data migrations at scale related to the consistency of their data. You see here, 65% of the respondents to that survey indicated that they were only somewhat or slightly, or perhaps not at all confident that the data they retain on premises in migrating to the cloud could remain accurate. Right? And really, this is a question of data consistency. How do you ensure that on completing a migration, the data that you've made available in the cloud represent very faithfully the data that were previously present on premises? It's one of those unique aspects of dealing with things at scale. Even counting data at scale is a challenge, let alone confirming that it's byte for byte consistent with the copy of that you retained on premises. So that data consistency was seen as a key challenge for large-scale data migration to the cloud. The second key challenge that was indicated from that survey response relates to the ability for those organizations to accept downtime or disruption to their business operations during the period of migration. And again, the vast majority of respondents indicated that essentially zero or close to zero downtime was the only acceptable level of downtime that they could incur throughout a data migration. Now, at small scale, perhaps that's not quite a challenge, right? If you've only got a small volume of data, it doesn't take a lot of time to migrate that to the cloud, and you could suffer or incur downtime to prevent applications attempting to modify that data while your migration is underway. But when we're talking about large-scale data migrations, perhaps hundreds of terabytes, petabytes, or maybe even exabytes of data, it simply takes time to migrate data from one location to another. And during that time, unless you can overcome the challenge that is presented by those data being modified during migration, again, it's very difficult to complete a migration without introducing significant downtime for your business applications, or by not accommodating the requirement for data consistency as an outcome. So these two things are related. Data consistency and business disruption at scale are difficult things to do. And not only are they difficult to do, but they're of critical importance for organizations looking to migrate to the cloud. The third aspect that we saw out of that survey response was kind of it's related to the technical side again, but really this is the effort involved in managing and creating and scheduling any implementation, any resources that are required to complete a migration. The manual intervention for any anticipated failures that, again, will always occur at scale. The oversight needed to respond administratively to bringing data back to a consistent state if it goes out of sync, to manage the flow of data throughout that process. So the overhead associated with putting in the effort to complete a migration of data at scale to the cloud, again, was one of those top 3 concerns for organizations that we contacted through this survey. So just to repeat, data consistency, the business disruption, and the level of effort and IT resources required to complete migrations were really seen as the key business risks in considering cloud migration overall. So to talk a little bit about the underlying technical challenges that sit behind large-scale data migrations as well, you have to consider what organizations need to achieve when they're going through migration. Obviously, key of mind for any organization whose business is built on the data that we're talking about here is the security surrounding that data itself. If you've put in place controls that exist on premises, mechanisms by which you can ensure that access to data is authorized in the correct manner, that it's audited, that it's visible and reviewable in order to ensure that your security controls are effective. In moving your data from one location to another, you need to consider how that security aspect is going to be catered for, not just in the new environment, but throughout the migration itself. In particular, how do you ensure that data in transit are kept free from any disruption or interception? How do you ensure that the controls that you place around the data that reside on premises are equally effective in the target environment in the cloud? Or perhaps how do you ensure that you can map from the existing security controls to new security controls that you're planning in a cloud environment? There are significant technical challenges around ensuring the security during and post-migration that need to be taken into consideration. Second key piece here is related to the downtime and business disruption that I've talked about already. Increasingly, we see that the systems that are built across large-scale data lakes or big data environments are becoming business critical. Any downtime associated with those systems, either ingest of data, the processing of it, the analytics, the access to analytic platforms that might be presented to third parties or business partners, become of business critical importance, and particularly at scale. So the SLAs related to downtime need to be considered and understood. They need to be well planned and defined in advance to ensure that the approach that you're taking to migration can achieve the SLAs that you need to achieve in order for that migration to be seen as successful. The third piece, again, I've talked about already, the data inconsistency challenge. Obviously at scale, your data are going to continue to change. Right? You can't present your applications and systems from modifying or interacting with your data as a migration is underway. If you're talking about migration at the petabyte or exabyte scale, you need to expect that this is going to take at least weeks of time in order to migrate your data from one environment to another. If you can't afford weeks of downtime across your business systems, and that's unlikely to be the case, it's likely to be the case that you can't afford that downtime. You need to account for that in terms of how the technical approach to performing migration maintains data consistency. How do you ensure that? The last two pieces, again, refer back to those items from the survey. The cost of the project, the resource requirements to perform a migration, the project time, right? What is going to represent the milestones across your migration. These are all things that need to be considered and planned for in advance. And maybe that's perhaps where I can invite Marta from Infosys to lend some insight as well into the approach that Infosys takes around planning migrations, particularly around the ways in which you schedule efforts, you phase them through, and you associate the cost and time associated with that in a constructive manner. If you're available, Marta, maybe you can chip in at this stage.
Yeah, I think thank you, Paul. I think the strategies around how to manage the dependencies is a first aspect of this. One of the ways in which we do that is analyze the applications that utilize this data, segment them into waves so that we can have more smaller chunks of manageable size that we can actually take and migrate as opposed to doing a big bang. That's one key strategy. The second strategy is to analyze the workloads. When I say workloads, there are typical data engineering workloads that may be running on a periodic basis, maybe once in a few hours or once in a day. And there are others which are continuously running, streaming workloads, and yet others where there are, data scientists actually building, training, and validating models where both the workload as well as the data profile tend to be very different. So it is to identify those, come up with a strategy on what pattern of migration would work for them, and applying them that helps with managing those in the most optimal way. I'll talk about that a little more because some of these scenarios did exist in the case study we are talking about. I'll talk about them in more detail at that point in time.
All right, that's excellent. Thanks, Marta. So good insight there into the importance around the planning for migrations and how that needs to take place in the upfront effort. The other side, of course, to the planning for how a migration takes place is the technical underpinnings for the way in which data associated with these platforms will be migrated from one environment to another. The reason WANdisco and Infosys are talking jointly on this webinar is that we've combined the technical capabilities of WANdisco's LiveData platform with the processes and expertise that Infosys brings to large-scale data migrations, having gone through this with organizations at scale in the past. And again, Marta will be talking to an example use case of exactly how that's been done. But the technical platform that WANdisco offers to support large-scale data migration is very important because it directly addresses some of those key business challenges that we talked about before in the survey response and the technical details on the previous slide. So we talk about this as our LiveData platform. And I guess to explain that, I need to explain what we mean by LiveData. From WANdisco's perspective, LiveData is the business critical data that needs to be continuously available across environments. So we refer to it here as continuously available in any environment, in every location, and again, at any scale, even while data is being modified, while it's changing. The way in which we do that is quite unique to WANdisco, and it's one of the technical capabilities that our LiveData platform brings that makes it eminently suitable for large-scale cloud migrations. So let me explain that. When WANdisco talks about the LiveData platform, we bring together a combination of technologies here in order to achieve this outcome of being able to migrate data while it continues to undergo change, but without disrupting business applications and without removing the guarantees around data consistency that are required by any organization conducting a large-scale data migration. The LiveData platform is the technical underpinning that makes that possible. How it works is what I can cover just briefly here. It's pretty straightforward at a conceptual level. For applications operating against data, our platform, the WANdisco LiveData platform, intercepts the activity performed by those applications against the underlying storage. And then it uses a consensus-based approach to obtain a global agreement on every proposed change to storage before that change occurs. We have this distributed consensus technology that's unique to WANdisco that allows us to enforce consistency across these disparate data environments without incurring the overhead of actually replicating data. Having achieved that consistency through this consensus, we then replicate all the changes that have been agreed upon through that consensus mechanism in order to maintain the global consistency of data between these environments. And then lastly, of course, all of this takes place while we only require a single scan of the source environment to transfer existing content to the migration target. So bringing those four things together is what constitutes WANdisco's LiveData platform. Now we embody that, of course, in product offerings that Infosys take advantage of in, for example, the use case that Marta will talk to. But we also make these things available more broadly as direct offerings, both from WANdisco as products that any organization can take advantage of, but also easing the way in which they're exposed through cloud service providers. And I'll talk to that in just a second. But the benefits of using WANdisco's LiveData platform, this approach to replicating and migrating data at scale while maintaining application operations and still guaranteeing consistency, is quite significant. Firstly, it allows you to automate data migration to a large extent. Marta talked about the planning of phasing sections of content that you want to migrate from one environment to another in order to make that a more achievable task. Combining that approach with the automation possible through Infosys building solutions around WANdisco's technology is really a key way to ensure the success of a data migration project. So the automation of data migration by taking advantage of WANdisco's LiveData platform is critical. The fact that we can eliminate downtime for business applications, so remove the need for any business disruption again, simplifies that planning approach because it means that you can focus the efforts around a migration project plan on the actual data and outcomes rather than dealing with the specifics of the application environment that surrounds your data at source. It really helps you simplify the planning required for large-scale data migration. By taking advantage of the fact that we can ensure data are absolutely consistent between environments and we don't incur the risks associated with data loss, gives you the confidence that you can isolate the validation of data consistency to a very distinct part of any phase through data migration. And I know that Marta is going to be talking about that shortly in the context of the use case. The efficiency that results from this approach as well is quite important. It allows you to focus again the areas where you gain from putting in effort rather than building solutions yourself, where you can take advantage of a technology platform that supports migration at scale. And of course, out of all of that, right, faster time to value, the ability to complete migrations in line with the expectations of the business is again an outcome of this LiveData approach by using WANdisco's technology platform. In its incarnation and availability in cloud service providers, I wanted to make quick reference here before I hand it back over to Marta to talk specifically about what WANdisco and Infosys have done jointly for an example use case there. I want to talk specifically about the incarnation of WANdisco's LiveData platform in the Microsoft Azure environment. We recently made the public announcement of what we're calling the WANdisco LiveData Cloud Services for Azure. This represents the native availability of WANdisco's technology for large-scale migration from on-premises big data environments to the Azure platform, integrated through Azure directly as a native resource provider. So it appears and can be consumed in a very similar manner to any other resource in Azure. The same sort of steps you would go through to spin up a virtual machine or establish a virtual network are the techniques you can use to bring up a WANdisco LiveData platform. We call this offering in the Azure Marketplace LiveData Migrator for Azure. It's focused very directly in its first incarnation on that cloud data migration use case, allowing you to take on-premises Hadoop content from your HDFS and Hive environments directly into ADLS Gen 2 storage in Azure, supporting target environments like HD Insight, like Azure Databricks, and other native Azure services that can reference ADLS Gen 2 storage. The fact we're making this available as a native resource provider really simplifies the deployment, makes it very straightforward to consume and use. And this of course, is in its general availability, is billed directly through Azure. Right? So you can take advantage of the fact that this just appears as a line item on your monthly bill from the Azure environment. Under the covers, of course, all of the core WANdisco LiveData platform capabilities are present there. Replication and migration between Hadoop compatible file systems and object storage technologies, that distributed consensus engine that I described before is driving our approach to LiveData migration, taking advantage of the integration with the native security mechanisms in Azure, integration with role-based access controls and other security infrastructure in Azure, exposing the interfaces and APIs to automate that, which is how Infosys have built up solutions around this technology, and integrating with high-level constructs like Hive as well. So quite a significant offering from WANdisco, natively integrated into the Azure environment in the event that your target for migration is Microsoft Azure. So with that, I think I've given a reasonable introduction to what it is that WANdisco does with our LiveData platform, why that hits directly against the business requirements that we've seen through surveys as being critical for organizations wanting to conduct cloud migration. And at this point, I'll hand it back to Marta to talk about the experience that we've gone through directly with Infosys and WANdisco working jointly with a customer case study for a large US retailer. Marta, over to you.
Thanks again, Paul. Thank you. So the customer that, like Paul mentioned, is a US-based retailer who had a goal of modernizing the platform that they already had on cloud, going from Azure Data Lake Store or ADLS Gen 1 to the new incarnation of that, which is called Gen 2, with minimal or no business disruption. The applications are business critical. There are, of course, tier 2 applications, but there are also tier 1 applications which directly feed out of the insights that are generated from this platform. So the criticality from a business downtime perspective is very, very high for the customer. The platform had, like I said, varied type of workloads on it. There were workloads which were real time. There were workloads which were teams based, experimentation based, and user workspaces. Apart from, of course, traditional data engineering workloads. We had a combination of data which is hot data, active, being touched on a if not a minute by minute basis, close to that. And we had data which was warm data, which is occasionally touched and modified and appended to. And we had data which was cold, still lying in the same larger data lake, still lying in the Azure Data Lake store, but data that was not going to be touched because it was a previous version of it, or maybe this data was too old to be touched because the business process does not allow it, and so on and so forth. So given the varied set of, and of course there are multiple subject areas, starting from the subject area, supply chain, every function that you can think of, marketing, every function that you can think of was supported on the same common platform. So this was a three-dimensional challenge that we were faced with. So obviously it called for not a one-size-fit-all solution, something that needed a fair bit of customization on how we did it in terms of segmenting them, like I mentioned earlier, into waves, so that the dependent data sets can be migrated together while still doing these into manageable chunks as opposed to a big bang. That's one part of the strategy. The second part of the strategy relates to dealing with the workload profile, dealing with, for example, if a workload calls for very, very high volumes of updates to the data, it needed a different treatment versus if there's a consumer who's running potentially workloads all the time versus scheduled workloads that you will see in a data engineering situation, and that can be very sporadic as well as very unpredictable. That into the in having its own strategies for migrating that, and other strategies such as, for example, cold data, which does not have to go through a keep in sync approach. It only required obviously a one-time scan and migration approach versus others which required a keep in sync while the business applications are running and touching them. This was a combination of strategies that we deployed, and all of these strategies were inherently supported in the platform that we used with WANdisco LiveData platform. So we had about over 3.5 petabytes of data prior to migration. A lot of that was fully analyzed, and some of it was even optimized in the target platform, and applications changing accordingly. The applications touching these were primarily Databricks, but there were other custom applications, Azure Data Factory and such, that were either feeding into or consuming the data, which was the other dimension of complexity, not with respect to the data, but with respect to the applications that also had to be mitigated and migrated as part of this effort. So the result was very clear. We'll talk about it in more detail about what benefits it delivers and why the migration itself benefits the development of this platform into a futuristic analytical platform. The migration was estimated to be about 14 weeks, and it was reduced down to 9 to 10 weeks over which migration was done. So this is a good optimization of about 40% of the effort. We had done this with zero risk. Obviously, the biggest risk is with respect to data security as well as data consistency. Like we talked about earlier, there was zero tolerance to it, obviously, both in terms of making sure the data is transported securely and also ensuring that where it lands on the target platform, the right access controls are set up, and most importantly, that the data is consistently moved over. Any single inconsistency with the way object stores are done, anyone who would be dealing with the data stored in object stores would be aware that this can entirely mess up a lot of things for that particular data set, which gets into an inconsistent state. Those were some of the risks that were managed as part of the migration project, and eventually we produced what was 100% consistent data on the other side, with all the security during the migration as well as the state of security post migration intact. And this was done over like I said, a 9 to 10 week period, compressing this down significantly from the original duration. Now that is the duration of the effort for about four and a half waves. I say 4.5 waves because there were more than 4 waves that were done to migrate this multiple petabytes of data. So having that being the duration, the downtime for almost all of these workloads were down to a matter of minutes, during which the switch was done, and during the entire migration process, the business continued to operate, continued to work on the data that they had on this platform. Paul, next slide, please. We talk about the approach from a methodology perspective, and go into a little bit of detail about what we mean by that. Like I said, typical approach is for us to migrate the data first, doing a one-time scan, and then keep the data in sync once a one-time migration has been done. Now, both of these are leveraging capabilities in the WANdisco LiveData platform, and there is a third phase which requires these applications to run on the 2 parallel environments in parallel, as if they are both sourcing the data from the data sources, ingesting them into the data platform, and then running them in parallel, essentially forking the flow of data, and that requires more testing and more in production validation of this to be comfortable to ensure that the consistency of the data is intact before it is cut over. So these are the broad 3 phases of how this migration is done. But there's a lot more complexity, as you know, attached to it. For example, the code remediation of this runs on a parallel track that goes through its own remediation cycle, both in terms of analyzing this as well as remediating it and testing it out. That includes some of the workspaces which are in the engineering side of it, and others which are in the consumer side of it. Consumer side workloads, the responsibilities were split up between the migration team and the teams that owned the migration workspaces. Overall, this was managed across 4.5 waves, like I said. So initially, a discovery and analysis was done across the code base as well as the data environment to analyze where things are what type of data profiles that we have, what type of application workloads that we have, and what volumes we have, so that we could distribute them, minimizing the overall risk, and to deploy strategies to suit for the specific type of profile and the workload. This particular picture depicts a single wave, and imagine this going to 4 or 5 times over, and that's the entire life cycle that was managed within this time period that I talked about. Over the next slide. Let's talk about a little bit about the migration architecture. Obviously, what you see on the left side is is a source environment with Databricks, a lot of workspaces, engineering and consumer, a lot of different applications accessing the data in this environment. A lot of them through Databricks, others even directly to the target data store. This was the Gen 1 environment on the left side, and the mirror image of this environment was on the right with the ADLS Gen 2. With respect to the migration components of this architecture, as you'd see, there are 2 pairs of servers that sit on either side, and doing a handshake, whether it is for the purpose of migration or for the purpose of live data replication for changes that are happening on the fly. All of these being managed within the LiveData platform, so that the components used here, including the client library, are part of the WANdisco LiveData platform that were deployed. Some other components and scripts to do the inventory of the data, analysis of the data, and validations were also housed in another server that basically had connectivity to both environments. This together, like I said, performed the 3 phases of migration: the migration, the replication, and the parallel run, as you call it. The project outcomes. So what did it mean? How was it delivered, and what are the benefits for a customer to do this? Like I said, a large amount of data, being migrated over a relatively short period of time, and with aggressive goals with respect to lack of disruption is a key outcome that was delivered to the customer through this, and the risk to production, risk to the data in terms of consistency and security were paramount, and the benefits of going to the platform for the customer were the fact that AWS Gen 2 provides a much better security model. Can have POSIX ACLs and several other benefits that are associated with that. It was more cost effective, so the customer could cut down on both data consumption as well as compute consumption, for example, for Databricks on top of it. And most importantly, this enabled analytics, particularly analytical capabilities that were native to Azure, as well as third-party components which were only going to develop going forward on AWS Gen 2. So it opened up and unlocked all of those possibilities for the customer, and it is particularly handy when it comes to highly disruptive business scenarios like what we are faced with right now in the country. So I think that is the high-level summary of the approach and benefits. Follow to next. We will now invite any questions for any part of what we discussed about the imperative with respect to migration, the technology, and under this there is underpinning this offering, and the approach that was used with this particular customer to do a large scale migration. I'll invite questions now.
Perfect. Thank you, Mata. And there are a few that we're going to start with. The first being, if my existing environment is allowed to continue operating during migration, how does your approach, process, and technology allow these changes to be taken into account?
I will start with that answer, and Paul, please chime in. Absolutely, that was one of the fundamental requirements for this migration, and I would say for any migration for an enterprise. If this takes even a couple of weeks for a small scale migration, I don't think we would be allowed to take this down in terms of business being able to not only access the data, but also to work on the data. And the underlying platform definitely supports the requirements that we're talking about. So during the entire duration of this, the business continued to run, and it was business had continued to access the data for a small duration of window when a cutover was being done. I'm not talking about the migration or the replication, or for that matter, even the parallel run. It was just for a cutover period when the environment was basically switched to point from the current data lake to the migrated data lake. That the business suffered a small downtime. It was in terms of minutes to give you a sense of what the downtime was and how the technology basically fundamentally enables that to be there. Paul, please chime in if you have any further thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Mata. So I guess the point about what the technology platform that supports migration can do to support a migration that requires your applications to continue operating throughout is very important. And Mata referred to the way in which you need to combine some planning effort around that to understand where your data will be affected by the continued operation of applications. And I already referred as well to the approach that we take with the LiveData platform to support the ability to allow those changes to continue while the migration is underway, so that if applications in the source environment continue to ingest or modify data, the changes that result from those activities will be represented in the target environment as well. But it also, I guess, gets to the point of, well, what does it mean to cut over from a source environment to a target environment during the course of a migration? A cutover by itself isn't always something that you initiate and complete at a point in time. There's validation and testing involved. There may be some changes in application behavior to work with the specifics of the target environment that would differ from how it operated in the source environment. And all of those activities need to be taken into account as well. So again, one of the benefits of using a LiveData platform to support this overall cutover, which is actually an extended process from source to target, is that it allows you to test and validate application operation in the target environment without introducing any data divergence there, because we can maintain global consistency regardless of where changing is occurring. If applications are operating in the source environment and in the target environment at the same time, the WANdisco LiveData platform allows that to take place because they each see the same underlying content in the storage that they have access to. They can each modify it with a guarantee that the data remain consistent across both the source and target environments while that's underway. So it gives you the opportunity in your planning to account for that in how you transition from a source environment to a target by allowing your applications to operate in either throughout.
Thank you, both of you. That was very knowledgeable, and definitely believe that the audience member will take that into account. And we have a second question that is saying, what are some of the unexpected issues that you've seen arise in large-scale migrations?
There's always unexpected things that occur when you're conducting migrations at scale. What we've seen repeated, though, is that organizations are typically unfamiliar with the specific aspects of data migration or analytic platform migration at scale, because they're not used to doing it. Organizations will have conducted migrations between environments previously, but it's unlikely that they've done that for their petabyte scale or exabyte scale environments, because this is a unique point in time where organizations are beginning the process of conducting this sort of work. Right? So that the sorts of issues that arise then are typically going to be new ones, unexpected issues that might occur. And we've certainly seen that across many of the companies that we've worked with, where the planning that's gone into place for a large-scale data migration, if it hasn't been done with the expertise of the combination of organizations like WANdisco and Infosys coming together, they can run into some unexpected issues surrounding that migration. Some of those relate to the points we've referred to before, particularly around the security. It's always the case in moving between environments. Those environments will have different capabilities around the security of access to data and controls against data access. So those differences need to be taken into account and planned for. And again, it's one of the reasons why it makes sense to take advantage of the expertise of a solutions provider like Infosys, who has done this in the past and can steer you away from those issues that occur. So besides the security differences between environments, the differences around access to data and the privileges required to do so. The other thing that we've seen occur that might not be expected is the different performance characteristics of your source and target environments for large-scale migrations, particularly when moving from on-premises to the cloud. The way in which storage and compute capacity is provisioned and managed and allocated in those environments is vastly different. You're moving from a self-service model built around infrastructure that you are likely to have total control over, to an environment where those controls are governed through services APIs exposed by a cloud vendor provider. And understanding the difference between a cloud service that exposes functionality and commits to SLAs and how that differs from what you would be managing on premises is definitely going to lead to some unexpected situations, which you'll need to take into account in both your planning and the execution of a migration. But Marty, you've probably got some better input there.
I just wanted to kind of take a couple of anecdotes further that, Paul. The couple of examples of data profiles. While we do the analysis of the data profile, there are always things that appear as a surprise. For example, typically the data profile analysis is done ahead of that wave because of the fact that business continues to operate, and because of the fact that some of these are relatively ungoverned consumer workspaces where an individual can basically write anything and deploy that and have that work on the data for their data science use cases. We have had surprises where there were sections of the data which were profiled differently, and they came out to be very different. And to our surprise, we found that there were folders which had over 1 million objects, and that starts to stress the system if those are not carefully vetted. And we have, as a process, while we will do migration with a tool, we will not allow the same tool to also validate it. As an independent validation, we have a requirement to validate the data so that the data consistency is produced by somebody and validated with a different mechanism and a tool. So those tools started to stress out when there were 1 million plus objects in a single folder, and there were other data profiles where there were large number of small objects, some of which we optimized as part of the process, because that results in higher savings for the customer. But those were some of the scenarios that we were faced with, and we had to make some dynamic configuration changes and some of the independent validation tools to even make some code changes to be able to accomplish a task. So some real life examples from this particular engagement.
Thank you, Mata. And I think we have time for one final question. And that question is, how would the complexity of my application environment affect the planning and execution of a migration project?
I think we talked about. I'll take this question and to lead with the answer. I think we talked about the answer that in the form of those 3 dimensions of complexity, and in fact, a 4th dimension, which I was talking about earlier, in terms of the data profile, in terms of the sizes that of these applications and the dependencies. Basically, making it imperative for us to move it together, and the fact that the applications touching them varied. So those are the 3 dimensions by which we categorized, strategized, and segmented this migration effort. That's basically just the beginning of it. Being agile throughout the process is absolutely essential to be able to make dynamic changes to how something was going to be migrated. For the example I took with the data profile change is a classic one where dynamism was the ask, and that will be obviously complementing the strategy that we lay out front.
Perfect. Thank you, Mata. And with that, I would like to thank Paul, and Mata for a phenomenal presentation. I would also like to thank WANdisco for providing the audience with a great webinar. Lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career. Thank you and have a great day.